She said, "Guys your age don't want older women, right?" I replied, "Love knows no age." The hallway lights at St. Laura Clinic flickered out and the building became a long red whisper. Exit signs. Monitor beeps. The hum of a generator deciding whether to keep believing in us. I had my shoulder in the equipment closet and a flashlight under my chin. Coaxing the transfer switch. When the load caught and the lights came back too bright, Mara appeared in the doorway with a clipboard against her chest like a shield she'd learned not to hide behind. "You did it," she said, not surprised. The first time she watched me talk a machine into staying alive. She said I built quiet around panic so the problem could show me where it lived. That felt embarrassingly right. I checked the vaccine fridge, holding, and nodded. She let out a breath she'd been saving for a worse outcome and smiled the small, private smile people wear when the ship keeps floating because someone remembered the bilge pump. We stood in the hush that follows a not-quite crisis. She said, dry but not unkind, "Guys your age don't want older women, right?" The joke should have skated. It landed with a seam through it. "Love knows no age," I said lightly, listening for what might move in her face. She looked past me at the frosted records window, at the corridor, at the ordinary world that had almost forgotten us. Then she shook her head the way you do when you decide not to apologize for a truth you've told sideways. I was 25, newer to the clinic than the paper towel dispenser that hated being touched. My mother ran a diner. My father ran out on his own hope the year I turned 9. Machines made sense, they failed honestly. People failed with rehearsal. Mara was 44, the clinic's scheduler and triage philosopher. Divorced last fall after years of balancing a man who held his opinions like cigars. Her son Leo was 14 and building a new self out of hoodies and long silences that meant more than most speeches. Mara moved a day's chaos the way a conductor moves sound, pushing. Making room, knowing when mercy would cost us 15 minutes but save a life. We became a team because functioning is intimate in a way nobody celebrates. I labeled cables, she labeled time. When a teenager in a hard mask limped in with a sprain, she angled the privacy screen so the girl could cry without losing her revenge on the world. When a provider's laptop died mid-consult, I had the back off before the patient could lose the thread of confession. "You make machines want to keep living," Mara said once. And I pretended to invoice the defibrillator for emotional labor. Town and workplace share a strange appetite. They smell a pear before the pear admits hunger. Karen from pediatrics called us a power couple on the staff board with a lol that dressed the rumor as a joke. I posted a reminder about policy. The admin locked comments. A week later Mara's ex strolled to the front desk at 6:55 p.m. Card in hand, Marcus Lane. Real estate, and asked if the clinic allowed co-workers to date. He pitched his voice for strangers. The receptionist lifted an eyebrow so sharp it could have cauterized a wound. He left the card anyway. By dinner Leo had heard. That's how fast an evening can turn into evidence. The night the alarm hiccuped again we were deep in the storage room. "I never wanted to start over," she said to the shelf. Not to me, but I couldn't stay the person I was becoming. She said I didn't have to answer. I said I grew up in a house that called that selfish but it saved me later. She smiled without turning. "You're very young. And you're very tired," I said, not diagnosis, permission. 2 days later the medication fridge tried to die without telling anyone. I felt the shift in the compressor before the numbers betrayed it. We moved like we'd rehearsed the play, cold packs around vials. Calls to the 24-hour pharmacy. A nurse sprinting a cooler into the rain. Me praying to a capacitor as if it believed in saints. We kept the temp in range by stubbornness and ice. When the courier drove off, Mara sat on the floor in the mop closet aisle and put her head back against painted cinderblock. "I spent years trying not to need help," she said. "I forgot needing help is also how you're a person." She thanked me for not turning the save into a movie. We catalogued what survived and wrote the grant that might give us a fridge that wanted to keep its promises. Dinner happened because the world owed us a bowl of soup. Leo argued that soup is not a meal unless it involves heavy bread. We litigated carbohydrates until Mara laughed into her sleeve and called us both children. After dishes, Leo showed me a song he was learning, Hesitation. Then streaks of confidence like colts, and Mara watched him with the tender vigilance of a mother aware that a boy becomes a stranger you'd still die for 1 inch at a time. At the sink she and I stood too close and not at all in a way we hadn't practiced. We talked about grant language that would make someone who holds a budget open their hand. I told her to praise their list even if they don't. She called that manipulation. I called it hope with paperwork. The ex filed his motion 2 weeks after the staff board joke. The packet included the blurry hallway clip where Mara's hand landed on my forearm as she pivoted around a cart. Watch it hungry. You see scandal. Watch it as a person who has ever worked in a building with corners. You see grace under clutter. HR called us in. Priya runs our policies with surgical kindness. Did either of us supervise the other? No. Complaints? No. Did we expect our friendship to become a relationship? We promised daylight and boundaries. Promised to tell her first. Priya slid the fraternization policy across as if handing over a recipe. Follow the steps. Get something edible. Outside in the gold 6 p.m. light, Mara leaned against her car. He turned our air into a courtroom. She said, Leo deserves a house, not cross-examination. I can transfer. I offered. Take me out of your weather. Leaving sometimes teaches the weather it can blow you where it likes. She said, we keep working, we keep the calendar honest. And we tell the story ourselves when it's time. Leo texted, can we meet? He chose a coffee shop with obedient muffins. My dad says you and my mom are. He let the sentence dangle like a bridge waiting for a name. Are you? We take care of each other. I said, we don't do anything you'd be ashamed to see. And we won't. He looked at the lid like it had answers printed inside. She smiles more when you're around. He said, gruff to hide relief. She yells at the insurance portal more. Too. I like that. He asked if I'd leave if the pressure rose. Not if your mom doesn't want me to. I said, not if you don't. He nodded. Long teenage pause. Then, if you hurt her, I'll be mean to you on the internet. We laughed and purchased a small truce. The hearing felt like assembling furniture, terse questions. Faith that the diagram would yield a chair. The ex's lawyer presented pixels with confidence. Priya testified with timestamps and sentences that turned into shields. The judge said, people are allowed to have co-workers, and I resisted the urge to applaud. After, in the parking garage echo, Mara rested her forehead on my car window. I hate that you had to sit there while strangers held your face up to the light. She said, I can be embarrassed without being ruined. I said, which was the truth I'd practiced until it fit. Summer laid its heavy hand on the clinic. The rooftop unit quit twice. The second time I replaced a capacitor with a prayer and a borrowed part while the city steamed below. Mara waited by the stairwell with water so cold it stung. You're good at convincing machines to keep living. She said again, I wish we could bill them. We survived on popsicles and jokes. And the evening patients left clutching paper instructions like passports out of something worse. We kissed once. August. Past closing. The grant printed. Toner on our fingers like faint guilt. She looked at the street the way people look at oceans when they think they might try swimming again. Do you ever feel like you're the only person awake who cares about the rules? She asked. Yes, I said, until I remember there's at least one other. We stepped together. It was not a movie kiss. It was a quiet clause we both signed in a language only we speak. When we stopped, we laughed softly, foreheads leaning like people trying on hats they can't afford. We will not be foolish. She said, we will be kind to the people who have to adjust to us. We told Priya. She said she could count and reminded us where not to touch. We didn't need the reminder but took it the way you take a vaccination. Grateful for the protection you may never see work. Leo tried to be cool. Cool in a 14-year-old is camouflage for hope. Gross, he said, smiling. Be normal, he said, begging. My dad will hate it. He said, warning. And Mara said, we can't live to please someone we aren't married to. He said, we live in a town. She said, We live in a town, and hugged him until the argument ran out of oxygen. He sent me a video that night of a skateboard trick he'd worked on for weeks. Captioned landed it. We speak fluent subtext. Punishments arrived in polite envelopes. A colleague who scooted her chair 3 inches away. A lunch invitation that stopped arriving. The ex switching Leo's pediatrician to one across town under the banner of privacy. But mercies arrived too. The lab tech said, "Good for you too," in a tone that carried more blessing than gossip. The receptionist with the lethal eyebrow said her cousin married a younger man and now runs the best marriage in the county. Patients kept needing help. The world did not stall for our drama. And that felt like grace. The grant funded. We got a fridge that purred. And winter's early dark pushed the 6 o'clock light to a teacherly gold. On the night the neighborhood lost power, our generator made us a lighthouse. People wandered in, not patients, neighbors, just wanting to stand in a lit room. We made coffee, poured water, and told jokes with rusty punchlines. I walked the corridors listening for despair in the wires. When the grid remembered itself, folks drifted out with thank yous that sounded like prayers someone forgot to aim. After we locked up, Mara stood under the exit sign and said, "When I was a girl I thought adulthood was a set of doors that opened if you said the password. Now I think it's this. Keeping a light on when the grid forgets you exist. And not minding when strangers come to stand under it. Guys my age want exactly that," I said, and she laughed like a person who finally believes what the day keeps saying. We did ordinary things that felt like vows because we meant them. Sunday pancakes where the first one always burned and we called it ceremonial. Text messages that said out of milk and I'm proud of you without distinguishing which mattered more. Evenings when Leo let his head touch her shoulder for the length of a breath and then gravitated back to orbit. We learned how to be in rooms without performing for the cameras that might exist. We learned to arrange our faces for each other rather than some imagined witness. Age felt like voltage, important for safety. Measurable, not the point of electricity. On the anniversary of the first power hiccup, Mara brought cupcakes with criminal frosting and wrote on the whiteboard, "Thank you for keeping the lights on." Someone drew a heart. Priya erased it and wrote, "Compliance." Everyone laughed because it felt like being loved by the rules for once. Leo stopped by on his way to a study group and leaned into his mother in that distracted, sacred way boys do when they forget to protect their tenderness. He nodded at me and didn't have to say keep going. I heard it anyway, driving home through rain that had not decided whether to stay. I thought about the question that started us. Don't young men avoid older women? I thought about my mother counting tips. About Mara counting minutes for people who needed them most. About how machines fail honestly when you listen. I thought about love as the simple courage of staying in the room where the work is and being willing to be seen doing it. At a red light a kid on a bike wove between cars. Sweatshirt bright with reflective tape. I blessed him with the quiet hope drivers use to protect strangers. Mara texted, "Leo concedes soup is a meal if you add bread." Emergency truce. I typed, "Compromise is a meal if you add love." She sent an eye roll I could hear from here. And then a single word, yes. Not capitalized, not decorated. The kind of yes you can build doors out of. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind I keep walking through. One ordinary, holy evening at a time. Winter crept in with its chalk dry air and the kind of early dark that makes even the boldest cities look like they're whispering. The clinic heaters clicked awake like small, cooperative animals. On Tuesdays, I started arriving an hour early to help the maintenance guy bleed the radiators. The building had been designed by optimists who believed air never got trapped if you loved the pipes enough. Mara brought in a thermos with cinnamon tea that made the hallway smell like a memory that belonged to everyone. She wore a scarf her mother had knit, loose loops that caught on the ID lanyard and made her swear under her breath. Then laugh because the swearing sounded too sharp for such a soft problem. Sometimes, on nights when the waiting room emptied early, we walked the long rectangle of the block and let the cold turn our talk into steam. She told me about Leo as a toddler, his outraged dignity anytime a playground rule contradicted the physics of his body. I told her about the year my father taught me to change a tire and then disappeared 2 months later. How the jack still smells like a driveway after rain. We traded origin stories not to excuse the people who raised us but to understand the angles our lives have been cut on. If there is a secret to loving, maybe it is this. Carry the weight of your past without handing it to the other person like a bag to hold. We were careful with the small domestic crossings that could turn into traps. I didn't leave a toothbrush at her house. She didn't keep spare coffee at mine. When she asked me to fix the chair with the wobble, I fixed it like a professional, with glue and clamps and time, not by propping a folded paper under a leg like a man trying to be charming. Leo watched me work with the kind of attention boys give to anything that might one day be a skill or a defense. Wood remembers. I told him, showing him the grain. You can't bully it, you have to persuade it wants to stand the way it was meant to. He nodded as if I had said something useful about furniture and also about him. Marcus, the ex, tried one more time to pull us into a public performance. He sent a group text, me, Mara, his own number, and, unkindly, Leo, proposing a family conversation at a diner. Mara typed and erased 3 replies while I stood beside her at the kitchen counter pretending to read a warranty. In the end she wrote, "We will not hold discussions that treat Leo like an exhibit. If you want to talk about school logistics, email me." Marcus sent a thumbs up that felt like a smirk in pictograph form. Leo's dot blinked and then vanished. A minute later, a separate text buzzed my phone. "Thanks, he likes to make everything a stage. I'm tired." It was from Leo. I wrote back a single, "Understood." He responded with a skateboard emoji and then, as if embarrassed by his own attempt at levity, a photo of his homework with a physics problem circled. A bridge must carry 2 different loads. He had drawn a tiny LED in the margin. I laughed alone in the kitchen and felt, not for the first time, how families assemble themselves out of private correspondences others would mock if they saw. February brought a stretch of flu that made our waiting room look like a landscape of blankets. The phones sang, the printers smoked metaphorically, and Priya slept 3 hours a night and still found time to bring every nurse a granola bar. On the worst day, a pregnant woman fainted at the desk and hit her head on the corner of the sign-in counter. The room inhaled to panic. Mara's voice sliced through like a line you can hold. "You," she said to a volunteer. "Call 911 and stay on the line. You." To me, gloves and gauze. I need her on her left side. We moved the way competent people do when heroism is a luxury and competence is a duty. When the ambulance wheeled the woman out, the room exhaled in a ragged chorus. Later, when the blood was mopped and the chairs set back upright, Mara sat alone in exam room 3 with her hands shaking so violently she couldn't zip her sweater. I zipped it for her and did not name the tremor. Naming can be mercy. Sometimes silence is better. She put her hand on my wrist in gratitude, not possession, and I felt a bolt of pride that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with respect. That night she told me she almost became a nurse. I stopped because I was afraid I would carry every room home in my pockets. She said, scheduling felt like caring without drowning. I told her I had loved biomedical engineering until the math made me feel like an imposter in a city where everyone spoke faster than I did. Fixing machines in rooms where people are breathing, I said, reminds me the point of math was always the breathing. We sat with that for a while, the two of us grateful for the ways we had failed into better lives. My mother met Mara in March. It happened because life, bored with our careful choreography, arranged a convenience. A pipe burst under Mom's sink at the diner and I was there in 20 minutes. Hair wet from a shower. Shirt half tucked like intention without a plan. Mara and Leo were eating pancakes in a booth by the window because Leo had a game at the gym down the block and she believed in feeding him sugar only if it wore the costume of breakfast. I slid out from under the sink to see the two of them watching me. Leo lifted his chin in the small greeting of teenage boys. Mara smiled in a way that asked if we could be ordinary in front of my mother. We could. My mother glanced from me to them and in one long, devastating look, understood more than I had told her. After I finished the repair and wiped my hands, she poured coffee and leaned on the counter like a queen greeting messengers. "This the scheduler?" she asked. "This is Mara," I said, "and Leo." Mom nodded to Mara first, which is how she gives respect. "You have a good posture," she said. "People trust you when you stand like that." Mara laughed and said she only looked tall at the clinic because she wore shoes with a secret inch. My mother's eyes softened. "I like you," she said, not asking permission from anyone in the room. To Leo, she added, "You want bacon?" He said yes with a caution that turned into joy when the plate hit the table. After they left, Mom wiped the counter slow and said, "Love is heavy sometimes. Make sure you and that woman carry it like a dresser, each on a side. Counting the steps, resting on the landing if you need to. Don't let one of you go backward down the stairs because the other forgot to say when the turn is coming." I told her I would try. She said, "Trying is already love wearing work clothes." Spring washed the alleys and made the clinic windows honest. We went to Leo's game. He scored once and looked for us in the stands with a hope so naked it made me want to build him a world where every shot fell. Marcus stood across the gym with a new woman whose ponytail swung judgment. We did not go over. We clapped at the right times and then bought Leo fries and let him talk about a kid on his team who never passed and the physics of bad teamwork. In the parking lot, Marcus called out, "Nice to see the staff supporting family hours," loud enough to stain the night. Mara touched my sleeve. "A small anchor." I said nothing. Leo said, "Bye, Dad," in a voice that did not invite further conversation. Later, at home, Mara called the silence between the three of us merciful. I called it earned. In April, the clinic hosted a fundraiser. We rented a hall that had seen weddings and wakes and everything in between. Priya gave a speech full of numbers that felt like hands. I stood by the demo table with an EKG opened up like a patient, explaining to donors how a capacitor and a bit of attention can keep a device from betraying the person who needs it. Mara moved among tables and made the money people feel seen without making the nurses feel sold. She wore a dress the soft green of a plant that gets the light it asked for. And there was a second where I nearly forgot to breathe because she looked like a yes I had said years ago and only now remembered I'd been waiting to hear back. Afterward, we loaded chairs into a van and laughed about the way fancy rooms leave a smell behind like expensive soap. Mara's heel caught on a cable and she stumbled. And I caught her elbow. And the look we exchanged was not gratitude or fear. It was the recognition you see on faces when a person finds the word they have been trying to remember. We did not move in together. Every sensible friend asked if we were waiting for approval from the town. We weren't. We were practicing a kind of devotion that doesn't sprint just to prove it can. But there were Saturdays when my jacket lived on her chair and Tuesdays when her book stayed on my nightstand because life, unpoliced, leaves artifacts where it has been. We made a rule that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with not becoming tragic. No secrets I could not explain to Leo in a sentence that did not insult him. It is harder to be messy when you respect the child in the room who has learned to measure adults by whether the air feels safe. In May, I was offered a job at a bigger hospital across town. More money, more machines, a ladder with visible rungs. I brought the offer letter to the clinic break room and looked at it the way people look at desserts that will make them feel briefly immortal and then very tired. Mara walked in, saw the logo, and her face did a quick, controlled thing. Happiness for me. Rehearsal for absence. A quiet plea to the part of the universe that honors promises. "You'll be good there," she said, and I heard the capital U. I said I wasn't sure yet. She didn't bargain. Later, when we sat on the back steps while Leo tried to teach the dog to understand a skateboard, she said, "Pick the place where you'll be proud of the person you have to be to keep the job." I turned the sentence like a wrench and found it fit. I stayed. The next week, the bigger hospital announced a hiring freeze and rescinded half their offers. I might have been safe. I might not have. There is a superstition among people like us that the world occasionally rewards those who choose to be loyal without requiring proof it was smart. June brought heat like a rehearsed argument. The air conditioner roof unit threw another tantrum and I climbed back up with the maintenance guy and an extra fan we had no right to believe would fit. While we wrestled the housing, a pigeon stood on the parapet and watched with a contractor's interest. The view from up there always makes our block look like a game board. I thought about how easy it would be to mistake a clinic for a square among squares when you forget the number of breaths taken inside because a nurse convinced a person to keep trying. When we got the fan to hum, I felt the good kind of exhausted, the kind you earn. Downstairs, Mara handed me water and the look people give each other when the day has been long and its length proved something worth remembering. The worst fight we had happened over nothing, as almost all real fights do. I was late on a Friday and didn't text because my phone had died and I had convinced myself that explaining later was better than stopping for a charger now. By the time I arrived, Mara had moved an entire afternoon of schedules to protect patients from a chain reaction my absence caused. She was calm in that way that in her means, I am furious and I am keeping everyone safe while I am. I can carry a day, she said, low. In the staff room, I can't carry not knowing whether I have to. I said I was sorry, which is a word that can be an apology or a sponge. I don't need a confession, she said, I need a plan. We sat and made one like adults. I bought a charger that lives in the clinic, another that lives in my bag. And we made a rule that a text containing only a period means everything is benign chaos and more words will follow. It sounds silly until you see it save a day. On Leo's 15th birthday, he asked to go to the river, which is a generous description of a creek that learned the word ambition. We took sandwiches and a cake that leaned left like a politician and a speaker that respected the neighbors. He and his friends jumped from a boringly safe rock and shouted like boys who believed the future had a trampoline. Marcus arrived with a paper bag of store cookies and a joke about how cake is the sugar cartel's propaganda. He nodded at me, grudging peace for the day. When the boys ran ahead, Marcus stood beside me on the bank and said, "You're really doing this for the long haul?" As if I'd ordered the same dish 2 nights in a row. "Yes," I said. He looked at the water like it had an opinion. "It's easier until it isn't," he said, almost kindly, being the young one. "Then one day you'll be the older one who remembers when she didn't need to sleep with the window open." "I'm not in it for easy," I said. "We're not trading compliments for youth." He studied my face as if hoping for arrogance and finding something more boring. He nodded, some ledger in him making a note. "Don't hurt my kid," he said finally, "and don't make him carry your love like a couch when you move apartments again." "I won't," I said. "We count the steps." It was an answer my mother would have recognized. August took us to the desert because Leo wanted to see a sky that didn't have to negotiate with buildings. We rented a cabin with a roof that underestimated the sun and a porch that overestimated the bugs. At night the stars felt close enough to make promises we knew they wouldn't keep. Leo asked 1,000 questions and then none. The way boys do when they are fed in other ways. Mara rested in a way I hadn't seen since I met her. The kind of rest that isn't sleep but a ceasefire with the part of your life that keeps inventing errands. We drove home dust-coated and oddly lighter, like people who had confessed to the sky and been forgiven for nothing in particular. In September, a new nurse joined, Alondra. Eyes like a plan, humor like a seatbelt. She teased me for talking to machines and teased Mara for talking to calendars and somehow made both of us better at our jobs. Alondra's presence changed the texture of the clinic, the way a good spice changes a soup. Everything tasted more like itself. She also told off a vendor who tried to flirt with Mara while pretending to negotiate a price. "We don't pay extra for disrespect," she said crisply, and the vendor recalibrated his mouth. "If you are waiting for the tragedy that punishes us for believing in something unremarkably brave, I won't give it to you." We had scares no story would buy at full price because they were the kind life sells wholesale. Leo sprained a wrist. I cracked a molar on a popcorn kernel and spent a payday on a crown. Mara's car needed brakes right when the rent rose. Priya's mother got sick and the clinic learned how to be tender to the person whose job had been to hold the rules. We helped each other and also asked for help elsewhere because community is just a fancy word for asking in both directions. One evening, late, a young man came in shaking, cheeks hot with shame, asking how much an STD test cost if you only had $20 and a fear of being seen. Mara brought him to an exam room and spoke to him like you would to your own kid if you'd been lucky enough to earn that trust. And I found a grant packet that covers exactly this and brought it like a miracle I had the honor to deliver. When he left, the boy said, "You made it not scary." And Mara said, "No, you did." And he believed her because she said it like the first honest sentence he'd heard all day. We had a second kiss in October and then not again for months. Not because we didn't want to, but because we were busy putting our mouths to other uses, explaining, teaching, thanking, laughing. The third kiss arrived the night the clinic hit its donation goal for a new ultrasound and the staff stayed to toast with sparkling water in paper cups. It was brief, and it tasted like relief. And Alondra Wolfe whistled and then apologized even as she grinned because sometimes joy is better when it's witnessed by people who would keep it safe. When winter returned, I found myself thinking less about the numbers of our ages and more about the arithmetic of our days. How many times we caught each other when a sentence fell down the stairs. How many times we checked the lock without accusing the other of leaving it open. How many times we stood beside a stranger's fear and treated it as if it was sacred. If I ran a tally, it wasn't to prove a point to a world that had long ago lost interest in our scandal and moved on to a fresher set of blood-scented facts. It was to remind myself that the quiet math of decent living is the only ledger that ever makes me moral. On New Year's Eve we didn't go anywhere. Leo went to a party that promised earnest supervision and delivered it. Mara and I made pasta badly and then better and then said, "This is the one," at the same moment because we had learned to identify a threshold by the way our mouths made the word together. At midnight, fireworks stitched noises over the neighborhood. Bright lies we agreed to enjoy. We kissed in the kitchen like people who appreciated that some clichés survive because they are the correct tool for the job. "What do you want next year to feel like?" she asked. "Like this," I said, "except with a fridge that never fails." "So, impossible," she said, smiling. "Ambitious," I corrected. In the first week of January, the hallway lights flickered again and held. The generator made its little oath. Somewhere in the building a latch rattled and then went still because I had shimmed it months ago. Mara walked toward me down the corridor carrying 2 cups of tea. Steam turning the air between us into a lens. She handed me one. We stood there for the length of a sip and let the day be only what it was, a day with light enough. With work to do, with the right person beside you who believes the work matters. "Guys your age don't want older women, right?" she said, for the first time as an actual joke. And I laughed like a man who had survived being misread by 1,000 people to be known by the one he needed. "Love knows no age," I said, and the sentence belonged to both of us now like the clinic keys. Like the calendar, like the compiled log of everything we had repaired. We took our tea to the front, turned the sign to open, and let the town in.